Hi everyone, welcome to Knitting Noodles. And in today's video, I think that I want to address a previous comment that I got about how to hold working yarn. Now there is many different types, techniques. Honestly, it's very individual for what feels good and right for you, how to hold it. But I'll go over a few variations. You can experiment, see what feels right, as well as a different way that you can do purl stitches and a different variation of knitting and purling, which is knitting through the back loop and purling through the back loop, which creates a slightly twisted stitch. And I'll show you the difference of those two. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and let's get into the video. Let's look at how to hold your working yarn. So let me bring you down here with a project I already have going, so you can kind of see like as I'm going with this, and I'll show you a few different techniques that you can use. Alright, the first technique, which I guess isn't really a technique, I find myself kind of going back to this, especially if I have a ball of yarn like in a cup or something holding it. I just let it drop and just pick up the stitch as I need to, which is not the best for if you want to do speed knitting. It is more of a, I'm relaxing and knitting, just pick it up, pull it over. It's almost like an extra step. The other way is I find myself a lot pinching it, but this does get really tiring, pinching. Way that I have been trying to, especially when I'm speed knitting, is wrapping the yarn around your pinky and resting it on top of your pointer finger like this. It makes it much easier to do knit stitches, and you don't have to tug for tension. It's kind of just there. Also, depending on the yarn, sometimes I have to wrap an extra time around my pinky, but for this wool yarn it is somewhat grippy, so I can just wrap it around once and it kind of stays put. Now right now I am working in a knit purl, a 1x1 ribbing. So you can do, as I'm doing here, just knit, bring it to the front, purl, fairly easy. Or there's another technique to do this. Now this is Continental style, which is where you hold the yarn in your left hand. The other way is holding it in your right hand. Now this is called English, or also called throwing, as you almost throw the yarn over. I learned Continental, so it's way easier. I've tried doing English, it just doesn't work for me. My brain doesn't function for it. But for Continental, there's another way to do purling. Now, it depends on what type of yarn you're using, if it's stretchy enough to handle this type of purling. Because if you have like a cotton that has no stretch, this is going to mess up your tension a little bit. However, if you're doing a 1x1 purl and you're trying to go fast, you go in for the purl, make sure this yarn is in front of that needle, go in for the purl, the yarn is still in back, you go around and scoop it through, and you have a purl. This way, oh, I don't even know if you could have seen that. This way, you kind of keep the yarn as it is. So I'll show you again. You take the needle, bring it behind the working yarn, you go in as if to purl, but without bringing this all the way in front. You go back, you scoop around and through. Now, like I said, if you do not have a stretchy yarn, wool has a little bit of stretch, so it is forgiving. But something like cotton, bamboo, any of the plant fibers do not have a lot of stretch. So this can really mess up tension and make it look like there's some holes in your work when there really isn't. So I'll show you again. You bring the right needle behind the yarn, poke it through to purl, twist it around and through. Let me just do it one more time so you can see. Behind, poke through, twist around and through. And that is another variation how to do a purl stitch. You could also just bring it in front. It's really just a matter of preference, which is all that knitting is. You just kind of have to find the style that works for you. Now, another variation of knitting and purling doesn't have to do with the working yarn. It's an actual variation of the knit stitch and the purl stitch, is knitting and purling through the back loop, which is literally how it sounds. Now, regular knitting, you go through this front loop here. You go underneath and through, you make a knit stitch. Now, if you wanted to, let me do it on the next one. This one's purl. If you wanted to knit through the back loop, what you do is instead of going through that front one, you just go through that back one. So you literally go in between the stitches, through the back loop, and knit that. Now what this does, it's a very subtle change in the stitch, and it looks like this if you knit through the back loop. It's a nice little, you can see that it makes a little twist. It is really just used as a decorative. There is such thing as twisted ribbing, which I believe uses this, and it just makes it look a little fancier, I'd say. So that is knitting through the back loop. Now the other thing that you could do is a variation of the purl stitch, which is purling through the back loop. Purling through the back loop sounds kind of confusing. Basically, you want the needles to face you, both of them parallel next to each other. You take the needle and you go through this back loop and you cross that in front. So let's bring the yarn in front before we do this. Needles are parallel. You go from the back to the front for purl, cross in front, and you would purl like a regular stitch. Now this looks very similar to the knit. I'd say the knit is a little bit more noticeable. The purling through the back loop is a little bit more subtle. There honestly though is barely a recognizable difference. The gauge is just a little different. I think I knit tighter for the knit through the back loop. Now, if you, that is just knit and purl. So knitting, the knitting for this was through the back loop. The purling was normal. This one, the knitting was normal and the purling was through the back loop. And then this, I knit and purled through the back loop, which doesn't look that much different than regular knitting and purling. There is the slightest difference. As you can see, it's almost twisted each set of V's versus this one, which lays completely flat. Both legs of the V are the same size as compared to this, where one is longer. Now this is entirely a design thing. If you find out that the whole time you've been knitting, you've been doing it through the back loop, or purling, you've been doing it way too difficult and purling through the back loop, it makes no difference really for your work. It'll just look a little bit more twisted, which isn't really a bad thing. You're just overcomplicating it for yourself. But those are a few variations of knitting and purling and what you might be able to use them for if you want to incorporate them into your work, and a few different ways to hold your yarn or styles to do the knit and purl stitch. Alright, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you all next week. Bye!